Pardon?
Governor Levine, have you joined us by phone?
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you, Chair Levine.
Oh, okay. I had it on mute. Shall I call it to order?
We are ready for you to call the Audit Committee to order.
Can you guys hear me clearly?
Yes. Pretty good.
Okay. Good afternoon. I'll go ahead and call the Audit and Compliance Committee meeting to order. My sincerest apologies to my colleagues on the board for my participation by phone, but I had a conflict I could not get out of. Thankfully, today we've got a great Vice Chair, Ed Morton, who was willing to pitch hit for me as the chair today. So I appreciate that, Governor Morton. In a moment, I will turn the meeting over to Ed to preside. This is our first meeting as Chair and Vice Chair of the Audit and Compliance Committee. And over the last few weeks, I've spent a lot of time reviewing the charter, meeting with Derry, Harper, and the staff, and I feel like we won't miss a beat from the activities of the prior committee and with the ongoing issues that we're dealing with. So I feel very good about where we stand right now, Mr. Chairman, and I will turn the meeting over to Governor Morton to actually run the meeting.
Thank you, Alan. Minoka, good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to Florida A&M, and welcome to the Audit Committee of the Board of Governors. Minoka, would you call the roll, please?
Okay, and Chair Levine, I know you're on the phone. Vice Chair Morton.
Here.
Governor Carter.
Here.
Governor Kuntz.
Here.
Governor Lautenbach.
Here.
And Governor Webster. Here. Vice Chair Morton, you have a quorum.
Thank you very much. The first order of business this afternoon is the approval of the minutes. I think we've had ample opportunity to review the minutes of November the 7th of 2012 and the minutes of January the 16th of 2013. Would you please recall that the committee met as a whole and the vice chair and the chair positions were vacant at the time. The minutes of these 2 meetings of the minutes are in your packet. Do I have a motion to approve the meeting of the minutes of the meeting of November the 7th?
So moved. Second.
We have a motion. We have a second. Do we call the roll? How do you do this?
You can just say, all in favor, say aye.
All in favor, please say aye. We don't call it. All right. All in favor, please say aye. Aye. Anyone opposed?
Aye.
I'd like a motion now to approve the minutes of January the 16th, 2013.
So moved.
Do we have a motion? We have a second?
Second.
Any discussion? Hearing none, all in favor, please say aye. Aye. Anyone
Aye.
opposed? The minutes will stand as distributed. The next item on our agenda is a presentation and discussion regarding Florida A&M University and its corrective action plan. I'd like now to turn this portion of the meeting over to Chancellor Brogan to update the board. And I believe prior to that, Governor Levine, you'd like to make a couple of comments. Alan?
Thank you, Chairman. First of all, I want to again thank the folks from FAMU for hosting us today. You guys can hear me clearly, I hope. I can't hear you guys all that well, but before Chancellor Brogan walks through the update on the corrective action plan, I wanted to make a couple of remarks about a couple of the issues just through my lens as the Chair of Audit and Compliance. And I will ask Governor Colson or Governor Hosseini or any of my colleagues on this committee to help me correct my course if my observations are incorrect from your perspective. There seems to be 3 issues that are outstanding for FAMU, 2 of which are the purview of this committee. The first one, which is really an issue for the full BOG, is obviously the upcoming reaccreditation for FAMU and the issues that pertain to that. I know that's something the Chancellor, the Board of Trustees, and the President are focused on. The 2 issues, in addition to that are on the table, involve an organizational audit, which each of you should have been provided a copy of from February 2013, and the corrective action plan relating to the findings of the Office of the Inspector General, which has been submitted by the university. First, I want to comment on the corrective action plan itself. No doubt, it is comprehensive, and I commend the President and the Board of Trustees for the effort they've made in pulling it together. I know, and I think all of us know, that they're committed to seeing it through, in addition to any changes this committee today may want to recommend to that plan. At this point, I don't have any recommended amendments for it, but we'll comment on one other thing in a moment. Chancellor Brogan and I spoke a couple weeks ago, and I've asked the Chancellor and his staff to stay very close to this and on top of the implementation of this plan, and to report back to Governor Colson and to the Audit Committee if they have any concerns on the status of any element of it. The plan that you have in your packet is designed to be a transparent dashboard indicating the status of each item so all members of the Board of Governors and the public can follow the progress. The Audit Committee is committed to every single element of this plan being implemented and, more importantly, being hardwired into the university's organizational, governance, and institutional control functions. Now, I just want to comment something specifically related to the plan. At the last meeting of the Board of Governors, I specifically asked for very specific responses on how the governing body was going to engage in ensuring a culture of transparency in the policies on campus, a culture of reporting when there are high-risk issues, a culture of investigating the issues, and correcting them with the governing body being the ultimate driver of this process through its policies and its procedures. And I emphasize the governing body because as I look at both the Inspector General's findings and, as I'll now reference, the organizational audit from February, what I see, quite frankly, are issues of governance. I commend the members of the FAMU board who've acknowledged that, and now I think it's important that they get beyond acknowledgement and focus on the actual implementation. And the plan contains a lot of the elements of what we asked for at the BOG meeting last time, specific to the audit process. And I'd only suggest to my colleagues on the Board of Governors that the issues of governance are bigger than just this plan and something that will require ongoing work at the trustee level. And finally, as for the organizational audit itself, I think everybody on the Board of Governors has the experience to draw probably the same conclusions I have. Some of the items are routine audit issues typical of those you would find at any university and are easily correctable, but there are some significant issues related to the integrity of the audit process, the process of decision-making relative to the Sunshine Law, the financial status of the athletic programs, and other things that are very self-evident in the audit. And again, many of these things relate, I think, based on my observation, my opinion only, the lack of hardwired governance processes that if are properly deployed and executed as planned by the university, it will protect FAMU from these types of findings in the future. At this point, there's no action required of the committee other than to review the action plan and make amendments if it should deem appropriate to recommend to the Board of Governors. As the audit points out, there are steps which have already been taken. There's others underway, including engagement of an external firm to conduct quality assurance of the audit process. So I thank the Board of Trustees and the President for engaging immediately and taking these steps. My plan, if there's no objection from the other members of the committee, is to be in constant communication with the FAMU Board of Trustees Audit Chairman to continue to track the progress at that level in addition to what's being reported on the dashboard. And for the rest of the detail, I'll turn it over to back to you, Ed, to let the Chancellor make his remarks.
Thank you very much, Alan. I would like now to recognize Chancellor Brogan, who will lead our discussion regarding the Florida A&M University Corrective Plan of Action. I would like everybody to know we also will be providing time for President Robinson and the board to make comments. Chancellor Brogan, you now have the floor.
Thank you very much. Mr. Vice Chair and Mr. Chairman, thank you, and members of the committee. First of all, I too, just like the chairman did, want to thank Florida A&M University for hosting this meeting today. Everyone here has been most gracious, most accommodating, Mr. President, Mr. Chairman, and we thank you and all the people at Florida A&M for opening the doors and giving us the warm welcome that we have received to do our work today and tomorrow. Thank you very much from all of us to all of your good people. As you recall from previous meetings, there has been a great deal discussed not only about some of the things that have been transpiring at Florida A&M University over recent years, but more importantly perhaps, where is Florida A&M University headed in the future of the institution? not just as an individual institution, but of course as an incredibly important part of the state university system of Florida. And one of the things we recognized early on was that based on the number of looks, if you will, at Florida A&M, from state auditors to consulting firms and even Florida A&M's own look at itself, we had compiled a fairly lengthy amount of information, and then therefore a good springboard to what sorts of issues the institution needed to deal with and ultimately reconcile through corrective action to take Florida A&M University into the future. The Board of Trustees and of course President Robinson have been great to work with during this time period, and I appreciate it very, very much. Dr. Robinson keeps his door open to me, probably more than he would like to, as I come and sit down with him and we talk about these issues collegially, because as you all know, coming from our last meeting, that was a very important part of this, that this wasn't about just saying to Florida A&M University, tell us what you need to fix and come back and let us know if you fixed it. It was about forging a partnership with the institution and the system to make sure that we were walking hand in hand on these issues, not only in terms of what needed to occur by way of corrective action, but as we're about to discuss here today, Mr. Chairman, very importantly, how we were ultimately going to determine if those corrective actions were having the positive impact that they were meant to have. So in speaking with Dr. Robinson, we both agreed that one of the things we first needed to do was to pull from all of the information that had been circulated, if you will, a relative blueprint of the items that needed to come to the Board of Governors for consideration, not only by way of corrective action identification, but over time to monitor those issues and find out what the status was of those corrective issues until which time they could be checked off as having been satisfied satisfactorily. Now, I can tell you, when I went to visit Dr. Robinson the first time on this issue, I went in armed with a draft of the corrective action plan, and the first thing he did was reach across the table and hand me back a very large and complicated matrix that he and his staff and his board have been putting together, because as you might obviously understand, this is a significant look at Florida A&M, but it's at a much higher level. His matrix and that of the university has to take the very, very deep dive down into every single aspect of the university. We didn't, and agreed quickly, want to take all of that information and all of that complexity onto the Board of Governors. It wasn't necessary and would probably be more than the Board of Governors should want or feel comfortable having by way of your responsibility as the oversight body for the state university system. But what it demonstrated to me immediately was that with Dr. Robinson's leadership, his board, they had already begun to put together a corrective action plan for the institution that was very deep, very complex, and very all-encompassing in its scope. And not just identifying those things that they needed to work on, but being able to develop the actual planning and implementation for how those strategies would be carried forward, who would be responsible for them, what timelines they had associated with those particular issues on an internal side. To that end, what you have in front of you today is a body of work that was created again jointly, because I wanted to make it clear to Dr. Robinson that we were not handing him the corrective action plan. We were providing a draft that we had pulled together from all of the different reporting mechanisms and looked at what we thought were the major items under the major headings that would be important for the Board of Governors to wrap their arms around and over time be briefed on as we continue to work with Florida A&M as to how they're progressing forward on these points. I think the chairman mentioned this in his preliminary remarks, but if not, I will repeat. This is a marked draft for a reason. We want, especially this committee, the audit committee, to be comfortable with this corrective action plan matrix, if you will, and the way it is formatted and the items that we have identified. We have scrubbed it, both our staff and that of Dr. Robinson and his staff, and feel comfortable with it, but that is not to say that this committee may not have other ideas or other issues they'd like to see included, or perhaps things on here that the group feels as though aren't necessary, perhaps, to rise to the level of the Board of Governors. Now, what's the ultimate motivation here? The ultimate motivation is to make certain that as Florida A&M, who themselves clearly understand their need for corrective action on a variety of fronts, works at those issues, that we as partners at the state level, because we obviously from a systems side have a major stake in these issues as well, know what those issues are and don't simply say to Florida A&M, good luck with those, and someday I suppose we'll find out how this all went. I think in working with these kinds of things before, just like an audit report, that a board of trustees at an institution level not only wants to know how the audit went, they want to know what the findings were, and they also, very importantly, not only want to know what recommendations for change were made in the audit report, they then want to see the university put together a corrective action plan with responsibilities, roles, and timelines so that as the corporate board, they can monitor success when success is finally achieved on those audit findings. Similar concept here. So we have put together a number of overarching themes, and then under those items we have put together some of the individual components for you that we think rise to the level of issues that the Board of Governors should very much want to see, and more importantly want to monitor on through and receive the very important periodic status reports as we work with Florida A&M University on these issues. So without, at the risk of reading to you, and I won't do all of that, but just to show you the major theme items, you have compliance with Institute of Internal Auditor Standards, and then you have several items under that. You have reporting to Audit Committee and President, several items under that. Finance and a variety of issues that obviously fall under finance. Academics and accreditation and the related items there. Facilities and construction, and then hazing and student code of conduct. So those were the major overarching themes, and then as I mentioned, there are a handful, for lack of a better term, of items under each of those that we believe help to identify the predominant issues under those overarching titles that this board, through its audit committee, should want to look at and should put regular reports on as to the success that Florida A&M University is having toward being able to, if you will, check those items off. Some of them are relative, either you do or you don't. It might be the development of something, and once that thing is developed, you've satisfied the issues. Others might be a bit more nebulous and require a bit more long-term conversation, look, and understanding. But these are the ones that we worked on, the ones we came up with, and even formatted it so that you could see, as perhaps cliche as it might be, a series of red light, green light, yellow light methodologies to report the status at any given time. Each of these things will be assigned a status, and then that status will change upon reporting to the full board where it is upon that reporting period. So you'll be able to at any time, even between meetings, be able to see what the current status of that particular item is as we continue to work with Florida A&M University and its leadership on each of these individual items. And then hopefully at some point we will reach the point where Florida A&M has satisfied all of these issues here, and then again, based on motivation, rather than just saying, I wonder how they're doing over there, as partners, full partners through this process, this board will not only know how Florida A&M University is doing on these things, but will be actively involved in the process of making sure that we can all declare once that day arrives, that they have satisfactorily dealt with each of these very important issues. So I'm going to end where I started and then be glad to take any questions, Mr. Chairman, on the subject. But thank Dr. Robinson for his open door, and to the board for giving us the ability to be partners in that regard. It's a much better relationship when you go into these things in that way. We can't have a system if we don't behave like a system. And a system doesn't allow one of its institutions to struggle through a process like this on its own and then wonder how the institution does at the end of the day. Well, we have to work with the institution, and that is the complete motivation behind this. But to do that, you have to know what the issues are, and that's what this matrix is meant to reflect. It is a fairly clear and concise grouping of important issues that not only Florida A&M is going to be working on, but that we will work on with them and then monitor, review those along the way, and even make change if necessary along the way to assure a successful conclusion to all of this. So thanks again to A&M, and with that, if you would indulge me one more, turn it over to see if Dr. Robinson has...
What I'd like to do is invite, thank you very much, Chancellor Brogan.
Yes, sir.
I'd like to invite Dr. Robinson and his team before we open it up for Q&A. Please, anything you'd like to contribute, we'd love to hear it.
Well, just briefly, I want to echo Chancellor Brogan's statement of cooperation. I think it's very important to the university that we have the ability to work fairly closely with Chancellor Brogan and his staff. I do want to thank Chair Levine for his remarks as well, and all of you for your obvious concerns about the well-being of Florida A&M University. And so we certainly have that same thing in common. We have, on many of these issues, as you know, Chancellor Brogan, been working on them for a while. We didn't just start at the beginning of the year or at the time of the operational audit, even at the time of the report on our anti-hazing program. We've been working on that for well over a year. So a number of things that are indicated here, we have been way out ahead of. Okay. However, we don't take any of that for granted. We don't want to rest on our laurels. We're going to continue to work on these issues to the satisfaction of our internal team, our Board of Trustees, and of course the Board of Governors. But the most important thing to us is that a year from now or 5 years from now, we don't see a recurrence of these very issues. So beyond fixing them now, we're fixing the processes and the mechanisms to ensure that these solutions are institutionalized, for now and into the future. That's very important for us to demonstrate that, because, for example, although we are doing a lot of work and have done a lot of work to address the full concerns that Sachs raised, we know that we're also in the midst of a 5-year review that's important to our reaffirmation, and that it has to stay firmly fixed throughout that process as well, not just to fix them for the short term. So we're looking at, the robustness of our proposed solutions, looking at ways to externally validate our proposed remedies, and this will be certainly a key in that process. Having other entities with an objective perspective like Ernst & Young that's looking over some of the issues with the audit plan and so forth. Having folks who are part of the institution, but also have individuals who external to the institution provide their input to help ensure that the robustness of our solutions is exactly what it needs to be. So we've started a process where we're making sure that we don't solve the problem in isolation. We're looking beyond the individual silos, making sure that the teams are looking comprehensively at the solution, because most of these things touch so many other places in the institution. It's hard to say that it's just an audit and compliance issue. It's just something in student affairs when it comes to hazing. It affects so many other pieces of the university, and that's how we are forging ahead with our solution to these. And as you said, this is a subset, but a good subset. It doesn't need to get any bigger of some of the issues that we're working on at the university. Because of the interconnectedness of all of these issues, we have to see them from that perspective. So we know that while we're fixing this, it's having an impact on something over here and vice versa. So I think this is a good place to start a discussion about how we present to the Board of Governors that doesn't necessarily need or have the time, perhaps the interest, but not the time to go into the minute details, because for each one of these issues, as you know, there's a lot of detail in terms of the specific strategies that are being implemented to correct these. But this is a great place to start. Our team, as I said, they have a running start. Any detail that you need around these as we do develop our solutions, we'll be more than happy to provide that to the board and to the BOG staff. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much. I'd like to invite Dr. Robinson. Would your chair like to have any comments? I don't know if you'd like that opportunity as well.
Thank you very much. On behalf of the board, I too would like to echo what Dr. Robinson has said about the cooperative relationship and the feedback and input that we're getting from this group via the Chancellor and crew in getting to where we need to get to at Florida A&M University. There's certainly a team of people here working diligently above and beyond the call of duty to get FAMU back afloat. We use a term around our Board of Trustees, stability. Stabilizing FAMU is the most important thing that we need to do at this moment. And without attempting to duplicate all that Dr. Robinson has said, I say that on behalf of the Board of Trustees, we are greatly appreciative of the support that we're getting in moving through these triumphant times. Thank you.
Thank you very much. This time, would like to open it up for any questions from members of the committee.
Mr. Chairman.
Sir?
Just a comment. I wanted to say how much I appreciate the fact that the Chancellor and President Robertson have stayed engaged. I think that the quality of the communication is quite profound, better than ever before. There's a candor that Dr. Robertson brings to it. He's just being forthcoming and forthright and say, hey, here's what we got going, here are the issues, not trying to hide anything, being forthcoming, working with our Chancellor and our board staff. The Board of Governors staff has been very involved in the process of working as we try to move forward. This university is very important to the Board of Governors. It's important to the state of Florida. And we are doing everything possible to move it forward. And I want to say publicly to Dr. Robinson and his staff how much we appreciate the opportunity to work with him. I know I've made a few calls to him and a few visits and all like that. He's been very forthcoming and helpful and answering my questions and all. And I think this is a good, Mr. Chairman, as you know, this is a good platform for us to work from. So as we progress down the line, when we do see these issues, not only can we deal with the current issues, and Chairman Badger said stabilize, not only can we deal with the current issues, but on a going forward basis, we can continue to move forward and take FAMU to where FAMU has been before and will be again. And that is like one of the leading universities in the country. I remember years ago when FAMU had the greatest number of merit scholars in the country. And the best is yet to come. So we want to continue to say, Dr. Robertson, thank you for you and your staff working with our Board of Governors staff. And Chancellor Brogan, you're doing a great job, so keep on keeping on. And I appreciate you guys letting me stick my nose in from time to time and check in with you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Do we have any other committee members that have a question?
I have a question for Chairman Badger.
Yes, sir.
If the mantra of the board is stabilization, your quest for stabilization, when do you think you will actually be at a board meeting and be able to say, we've achieved that objective?
As soon as possible.
We all know that.
To be real honest with you, I would suspect that it will take, at the rate that the group is working now, especially with the number of hurdles that FAMU has to engage in, at probably about a year to a year and a half.
You say a year and a half?
A year to a year and a half to be able to say, it is finished, we're here, we're back, we're stabilized, we're moving forward.
Mr. Chair, could I pile on to that for a minute? I think that's a fairly accurate portrayal. What we haven't discussed at this point is reaccreditation. Although I've talked about it a great deal to both President Robinson and Chair Badger. Let's go back briefly in history And remember that when the search began for the new president, we had not yet received from the Southern Association of Colleges and Schools the letter placing Florida A&M University on probation. Probation in accreditation standards is a little difficult to explain other than to say if you are not reaccredited, it's a world of hurt. Anybody in the country who has ever lost their accreditation will tell you that there aren't many worse things that can happen to an institution than not being accredited. I can give you, and I won't, a long list of impacts that non-accreditation has that are frightening in many ways. Things like students not being able to receive federal funds for Pell Grants. I don't know what the percentage of students at Florida A&M who are on Pell Grants is, but I would imagine it is sizable. So just that, no federal agency grants for research. And those are just financial issues. You won't even get into the issues of people wanting to recruit those first-tier students to a non-accredited institution, et cetera. I'm not saying this is the prophet of doom. I'm saying this for a couple of reasons. One, they understand that and did when that letter came. And that changed the game. Totally was a game changer. It sucked all the air out of the academic room and required that we go back and make the reaccreditation of Florida A&M University priority one, not just as an institution, but as a state. And so the realignment of everything that has been happening at Florida A&M to that primary mission, that priority mission, has been key to where this university is going. To fix all of the things that they're dealing with in their matrix and this matrix are critically important. But if this institution were not to be reaccredited in a year, much of that work probably wouldn't be necessary over the long term, to be melodramatic. I also know that by suspending the search for the new president, and that has been questioned by some, that some people might think that it just wasn't a quality field of candidates or perhaps there was another agenda. The agenda, as I understand it, was rather clear, and that is trying to find a world-class president when the issue of reaccreditation hangs literally in the balance is a very difficult thing to do. Even if you find an outstanding president who finds out 4 months after his or her tenure begins that they are the president of a non-accredited institution, what have you accomplished other than bringing in a high-quality president? So by virtue of that fact, readjusting the timing on all of these things, as has been done by the Board of Trustees at Florida A&M, they felt to be incredibly important so that when they do go out to find a president, they will be able to offer that job to someone not only for a university that's not on probation, but that has been reaccredited for another 10 years. So these are tough decisions, and that's why, and I'll wrap up here on this issue of timing, I think we're going to have to see significant accomplishment toward all of these items within a year, because so many of these items tie back directly to the issue of reaccreditation for Florida A&M. It's provided, there was already an urgency for these things. There is a special urgency now over the next year to make sure that these are married with the quest for reaccreditation for the
Chancellor,
institution.
can you just make sure I understand, or President Robinson, so the 12 to 18 month journey towards stabilization, where is the intersection on reaccreditation? What's the time period, the expectation?
Dr. Robinson, would you?
Sure.
I'm sorry, Mr. Chairman.
And I just want to clarify some clarifying language. University remains accredited. It's on probation. We want, to avoid having any further sanction imposed upon the university, which could include loss of our accreditation. Okay, but what we're trying to achieve normally is reaffirmation when you haven't lost your accreditation. That's what we want to maintain. And in fact, we're in the middle of that sort of 5-year process that's required by SACS in the first place. But with regard to the specifics of this most recent sanction from December, we now know that a special committee will be appointed that will visit the university September the 24th through the 26th. A written report has to be provided to that committee at least 30 days in advance of that on-site visit, which could be a couple of days or so, as I said. And so that would be due on or about August the 27th of this year. So that's the window we have to get the written report in. There may be a little bit back and forth after the committee leaves. You know, for their report, it'd be an opportunity for a fact check, as you typically do in these types of circumstances. But the commission will render its decision in December of this year at its annual meeting, which I believe this year is in Atlanta, Georgia. So we'll know one way or the other from the commission at about the same time we got the sanction imposed in 2012, in December of this year. Okay?
Thank you.
All right.
Yeah, thank you.
Do we have any other discussion or questions from the committee? I'd like to offer a couple of observations myself then. When any of us publish a business plan or corrective action plan like this, I think something that I would be looking at as a fiduciary would be the assignment of specific responsibilities as to who will be held accountable for accomplishing or successfully achieving these goals, objectives, and or particular metrics that we've got outlined in this draft. So I think accountability needs to be infused into the process. Second would be I would assign a deadline. I would, rather than slow progress, no progress, good progress, we're either on schedule or we're not. And I think I'd like to see a specific target date which would be ascribed or assigned to each of these metrics. The last observation I would make, I think the Chancellor has raised, and perhaps in a different context. That is, I think we also have to be careful about blending the line between fiduciary responsibility of this board and operational responsibility, like reconciling bank accounts and some other matters that might be better assigned to the university itself and hold them accountable for doing that, but maybe in a different way than reporting, yeah, we're reconciling the bank accounts every month, that kind of a thing. So I think just as a general observation from 10,000 feet, the ability to successfully separate operational responsibility from fiduciary responsibility is something we ought to just factor into as we look at the draft. Hearing no other discussion, I'd like then to move on to the next topic. The Audit and Compliance Committee has, as you're well aware, several, I think, critical functions. And our approach to each of these major functions is to have a division of the responsibilities among the various committee members for the purpose of taking, if you will, the lead in these functional areas. The chairman, Levine, has made preliminary assignments to the committee members for the committee to review. Derry Harper, our Inspector General, will provide us now with a description of the Audit Committee's responsibilities as set forth in the draft Audit and Compliance Committee dashboard. Without further ado, Mr. Harper.
Good afternoon. Before I begin, Governor Morton and Governor Levine, I'd like to introduce Lori Clark, who's a compliance analyst and a part of the Office of Inspector General, and much of the work product that you see, of course, coming out of our office, Lori is instrumental in presenting, and of course, is a great service to the Board of Governors in that regard. On page 77 of your meeting materials is the Audit and Compliance Committee dashboard, and I have asked Governor Morton in my conversations with Governor Levine for a little time to discuss in an overview kind of fashion the major functions of the Audit and Compliance Committee. One brief comment, that document's a little difficult even for me to read, and I have it here in person. Since Governor Tripp was here, the original Audit Committee work plan was a rather robust document, and I was asked by both Chancellor Brogan and by Governor Tripp to come up with a dashboard level. Behind each of the particular responsibilities outlined there will be a more robust, you can call it spreadsheet, file cabinet, but having an individual on the board, and I'm sorry, on the audit committee who is primarily responsible for providing us guidance and oversight, we decided was a good way of presenting the work plan. Of course, all of this is subject to your discussion. So if I could just have a few minutes, I have a few slides here and I'm going to go through them. I'll call it fast break since we're in the midst of March Madness. Just an overview of the Audit and Compliance Committee function, which by necessity will require me to discuss some of the responsibilities and duties of the Office of Inspector General. You have all, I know the new members of our committee and those who are now our veteran members, had quite a few opportunities for orientation, so I'm not going to spend much time. But our governing authorities, in addition to the ones that you've had to discuss and that you're now becoming very familiar with, and the veteran members of the board who've been here for a while know real well, are listed on this particular slide. The two I would highlight, though, are Section 20.155 of the Florida statutes. That's the Board of Governors Inspector General Act, and then the overall Inspector General Act. That's Section 20.055 of the Florida statutes. And we're going to say, I'll say just a little bit more about those. The other item on that list is the Board of Governors Regulation 1.001. That's the Powers and Duties Regulation. The Audit and Compliance Committee, under the leadership of then our chair, Governor Tripp, undertook a collaborative and cooperative process to develop an Audit and Compliance Committee charter and a charter for the Office of Inspector General and Director of Compliance. If I had to try to describe it and use a metaphor, I wear three hats. I am, of course, Chief Audit Executive for the office of, for the board office. I also act, of course, in an investigative capacity at the direction of the board and also for other purposes as the compliance officer for the board and in compliance activities. Both of these statutes and all of the information I'm going to discuss with you is either available on our website, and we also have an Audit and Compliance Committee handbook, which we're updating as we speak. In addition to that, you may find in paper form the annual report that we're required by statute. It's also on the list of duties and responsibilities that the Audit Committee has and that the Office of Inspector General is responsible for taking care of. To repeat the obvious, both the charters were approved and ratified by the board in March of 2009 and in June of 2009. Each year, and that is also on the list of duties and responsibilities, those charters are subject to a review. We go through it line by line. We submit it to our counterparts and interested constituents in the SUS, and then we come before you with recommendations for changes. It's only a 4-page document and is available to you at any time. I wanted to list some of the activities of the Audit Committee and just highlight a few, again, in the interest of time. The first bullet there, oversight of activities related to internal audit, financial controls. Governor Morton teed this up by saying fiduciary responsibility. And the Audit Committee has been delegated the responsibility by the board, but the board reserves that overall fiduciary responsibility to provide oversight of the internal audit function. Now, the other metaphor that I've used is my responsibilities as Chief Audit Executive, based upon our governance structure, begin and end with the board office. But we do a risk assessment, that's also on there, and an audit plan. We conduct internal audits, provide compliance and consulting kinds of services in accordance with applicable standards. The other bullet there is review and confirmation of appropriate management response to reports of significant audit or compliance related findings and recommendations. In the next month or so, you'll receive from me, which is required by statute, a 6-month follow-up on the operational audit conducted by the Auditor General of the Board of Governors. That's required by the statute. I probably should have mentioned that our 2 charters combine both the statutory responsibilities and the specific responsibilities that this Audit Committee and the Board have given for the function of the Audit Committee and in furtherance of the particular fiduciary responsibility of the Board of Governors. So all of this is in the charters, even though the statutes, of course, have some more specifics that we have to follow. You have some additional responsibilities, and on this slide I would just highlight 2. Acting as a liaison with the audit committees of university boards of trustees is extremely critical. It has proven to be critical and valuable in our staff trying to carry out our functions, and it's something that this board, I think, has done a very good job of doing. In addition, the Board of Governors through the Audit Committee has the authority to direct the IG to conduct an investigation if there is reasonable cause to believe a university board of trustees is unable or unwilling to do so. Now, in those particular instances, we're going back to our governance structure. My office has no authority in investigative matters but what this board assigns to me, because each of the universities has first their own board of trustees, their own chief audit executive, and responsibility for the day-to-day operations of the university, which would include investigating matters. But there are instances where this board has felt it necessary for us to review whether the university is able and willing to do so in various circumstances. And of course, in the most recent instance where we were given a directive to investigate matters at Florida A&M University. I want to make it clear now, getting down in the weeds just a little bit, and I'm looking at Governor Morton to keep me on track in terms of time. We go through a preliminary review process. We review complaints from all of the universities in the state university system. And when I say complaints, that is individuals complain about matters at the universities, and they bring the matters to us. We review those, track them, and make a preliminary review and report out, usually to the chair of our board, always to the chancellor. And I should say, the only reason I say usually with the chair of our committee, is because, of course, there might be instances where we don't have a chair in place. But one of the things that I wanted to emphasize in that regard, Chancellor and our previous audit committee chairs, I have no doubt that the committee as it's presently structured will want to keep up with that. I saw that now Ava Parker, and former member of this board and chair of my audit committee, has come in, and she was one of those folks who wanted to make sure she knew what was going on. So engagement by the audit committee has never been an issue. I'll move on quickly, sir. In addition, as we've already discussed, and Chancellor Brogan and President Robinson have pointed out, the audit committee would be the primary point for reviewing any instances where we are looking at whether a university is adequately responding to items that have been identified in external audits by whatever the entity might be, and to initiate inquiries if it has any cause to believe that those particular items and audit findings are not being handled. I never miss an opportunity to emphasize the fact that objectivity and independence by your Inspector General is extremely important. There is a dual reporting relationship set forth in both charters. I report to the board through its audit committee and also the Chancellor Brogan. And what I usually say is I have at least 17, sometimes 18 or more bosses. We appreciate the comments I know that were made earlier by Chancellor Brogan. You can pick up the phone and call me anytime, whether you're a member of the committee or not. He emphasized that, I know, during some of our discussions, and I wanted to just repeat it if I may, Chancellor. Finally, and we won't spend much time on this, I mentioned Florida Statute 20.055 because it has some particular requirements that some of the other universities' chief audit executives do not have. They're listed there. And just end with just a brief, we are responsible by that statute to issue an annual report by September 30th of each year. In that annual report, we try to develop a vision, mission, and motto statement that were consistent with the Board of Governors. And of course, our vision is to enhance public trust. Our mission is to provide leadership in the promotion of accountability and integrity. And then that last one, the motto, I'll just take 2 minutes to talk about. We are about making a difference. One of the few downsides to this job is I don't get a chance very often to engage in the most important constituency, if you wanted to try to rank them, that we have, and that is the students. It's always about the students. So we approach each of our tasks as if it's vital that we not only do it with whatever the particular challenges are, that we remember that it is about the students. Now, that's all that I have, Governor Morton. Governor Levine, can you hear me? Governor Levine?
Yes.
Okay, then. That's all that I have in terms of the slides. I'll be glad to take questions, but really, I should turn it back over to you and the other members of the committee to discuss the audit committee dashboard, make any changes, and you've made preliminary assignments.
Thank you very much, Mr. Harper. Do we have any questions for Mr. Harper while he's up there? Thank you very much.
Okay, sir.
Do we have any comments, observations people would like to make about the dashboard? Everybody happy with what they got assigned?
We are happy. We're very happy. I didn't know there was an option.
Hearing no option, Mr. Chairman, we'll close the discussion. That concludes, oh, we have a question. I'm sorry. Please.
Mr. Chairman, there was one item in there that I had a question about. It was the prohibition of design-build construction. Is there a date when that will be stopped? Because that potentially can lead to cost savings. And if we have a blanket prohibition of design-build, it's something Chris can answer later. if necessary.
Chancellor Brogan, could you answer that?
I can't, about the date certain, but
Okay.
when we switch to facilities and Chris comes up, between Chris and Tim, I'll bet we can get that question answered. Thanks, Dr. Cho.
Okay. Thank you.
Yes, sir.
Do we have any other comments? Hearing none, I have no additional comments to bring before the committee. Governor Levine, do you have any comments that you'd like to close with?
No, thank you. Thanks, Ed.
In that case, we're adjourned.
Okay, the next thing on the agenda is to have a break. So we're going pretty fast, so why don't we take a 10-minute break?